Is this thing on? Ah, yeah. Hello. Somebody in the Lightwave channel was asking for some basic keyframing tutorials, and you know what they say about a picture tells 1,000 words? Well, let's record thousands of pictures. So I'm going to use Modeler and Lightwave in this, and I'm running them without the hub, as I came from very early Lightwave on the Amiga where we didn't have it. And if you don't know how to disable the hub, you just add a -0 on the end of the two shortcuts, and that stops it being loaded. This breaks some of the interconnectivity between the two applications, but I favour that personally. You may be different, but that's entirely up to you. So let's get started. So what we're going to do is just a very, very basic tutorial on keyframing, just moving stuff around the scene, rotating it, and seeing how you can control the curve of the motion and things like that. So excuse my very regional accent, and hopefully you can hear me okay. I've thrown the setup together to try and do this tonight, but we'll give it a go nonetheless. So we're just going to make a simple prop object for animation. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make a box, and I'm not particularly fussed about the size of it. I can call up the numeric properties with n. You can see there it's about 3 meters, so we could just do 3, 3 and 3, and then center it with 0, 0 and 0, and that's that completed. I'll try and call out keys as and when I hit them. Some are important, some aren't, some you'll just be used to, but shout if there's any questions. So there's our object. It's nothing fancy. What we'll do is we will now taper this end down. So I'm going to go to point mode with space to toggle the mode, and I'm going to use Shift H to go into scale, and I'm just going to taper that end down, and then I'm going to use T to move and push that end out. So we've kind of created a sort of an arrow thing. Now notice this darker black line here. It's on all three views. This represents the 0 point of the 3D world. So this is, if you like, this is 0, 0, 0 in X, Y, Z. And we can rotate around the view, and you can see -Z there, +Z there. So this is, if you think of this as the direction of travel. Now some 3D software, the Y and the Z axis are the other way around. This is just the way I've learned, so I'm used to it. Others have learned on other systems where Y is depth and Z is up, but this is just the way Lightwave is. So we've made a little arrowy object thing there. So we're going to save that into our project directory. Now this is another good tip if you're not used to setting up a project with multiple objects and scenes and all sorts of things. A great way of managing it. There is a project manager thing built into Lightwave now, but again, I've learned old school, so I have just a directory that I copy and paste as I need it. So I'll just show you the directory here. This is how I set it up, and you can have multiple folders. I just tend to make a project folder name. If you call it underscore, it always sits at the top of the directory listing, so you can always find it. So images, objects, scenes are the three important ones. References, where I dump any material from, things I've gathered off the web, images, ideas, a script, that sort of thing. Details.txt is just a text file I drop in personally, and this allows me to drop in any notes or reminders of things I've got to do in a project. So it's sort of record keeping basically. Recordings I've created for this one, which is where I'm dumping the actual recording to. So if we go back to there, so make sure you set your content directory, and then when you do save object as, you'll notice it's going into that project's directory. So this keeps everything nice and organized. So I'm going to call this arrow and just hit enter, and that's saved. So because we've designed this object so it's facing forwards, if you think of positive Z up here as away from you or looking out your eyes, this always means that as you animate this around a scene, you can point it in the direction where you want it to go, rather than having to think 90 degrees out, so you're having to rotate it always round from left or right. But we'll have a look at that now in Lightwave. So this is basically all we're going to do in Modeler is just make this arrow. So here we are in layout, and I'm just going to check the content directory has been set the same. So when I do load object, it's looking in our project, and this is great because it stops you accidentally saving stuff or loading stuff from the wrong project directory. So I'm just going to load arrow LWO up, and you can see there it is. I'll change to wireframe mode just so we can see what we're doing. So just a little bit of explanation if you don't realize this. We're in perspective view here, so we're rotating this around, and this isn't the camera. This isn't what we're going to render. This down here is the camera. So when we actually change to our camera view, we'll see what we'd expect, which is what we'd see is the back. What we'd see basically is a square, a grey square, which is there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get us a bit more room to play with. Select the light, and then I'm going to use T to move left and right. And if you hold the right mouse button and push up, that goes up and down in the y-axis. The camera, I'm going to select. This represents the camera's field of view, if you don't know. So this is like where the image that it sees projected onto that rectangular screen, and that's based on your camera settings in camera properties. So I've got this defaulting to full HD. So we're just going to move the camera out of the way as well, as we really don't need to see that. And then I'm going to select object. So absolute keyframing 101, if you like. So this down here represents your timeline. So this is time going left to right. Now it's in frames, and you can change that display to seconds, or there's some other options in there. I think feet, as in like sort of film, feet of film. I tend to favour frames just because it's what I'm used to. The only thing you have to remember with frames is if you do an animation, what frames per second that animation is going to be based in. So in the UK, which is where I am, if the accent wasn't a giveaway, you're going to be looking excuse me, you're going to be looking at 25 frames a second for almost everything you produce. If this was America, you'd be maybe working at 29, or if you were doing something for film, possibly 24. But Lightwave supports all manner of frame rates, so it really doesn't lock you into any one of those three. You just have to remember that when you're at, for example, 25 on the timeline, you're at 1 second in a UK environment, but less than 1 second in a US environment. You can change the start and end frames down here, so if you needed more frames on your animation, let's say you wanted 1,000, you can just pop that in. This won't affect any keyframes or any animation you've already put down. This will just give you more numbers, and in fact if you drop that number down, so that let's say you've got a keyframe up at 900 and 1,000, and you drop it down to 25, you won't lose those keyframes. It doesn't delete them. It just means this is the range of keyframes that you can scrub between. So let's put that back down to we'll do 125, so that's 5 seconds of UK animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to frame 0, and you can see there's already a keyframe on frame 0. That's kind of a default. When you load when you load an object in, it'll get a default keyframe of 0. You can delete it if you have other keyframes elsewhere on the timeline, but if this is your only one, then that's it. It's stuck. You can't delete it and not have any keyframes of at any point in time. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the start position of this object, and we're going to put 4 or 5 keyframes down over that 5 seconds so that we can see how the object moves. So we've got object selected, and I'm going to use T to move, and I've positioned it a little bit left and back, and we can check it in 3D. We can see it's almost bang on through the horizon line. There we go. So this is sat on the horizon, and that's there. So a habit I got into a long time ago was just putting in a keyframe, whether there's one there or not, if I've just changed something. So this option down here, auto key existing, By default, I think Lightwave sets it on all channels, and it's a real pain because if you move an object and you're on an empty keyframe, it just creates a keyframe. So I have always switched it over to auto key existing, and this means it will only create a keyframe. Well, it won't create a keyframe. It will only alter the settings of a keyframe if one exists on that frame number. So right now we can see that we've moved that there. It's remembered where we are. So if I scrub up and down, it stays there, and because that's what we've now set it to. So I'm going to go to frame 25, and I tend to actually put the keyframe in first, then move it. And I think it's just because I've been caught out so many times with the auto key option that I just do my own thing now, and that works for me. Again, you'll get used to this. You'll figure out your own methods. There is no one right answer. These are just tools in a toolbox. You use them how you feel. So I'm going to put in a keyframe, and you can see there's now a little line there. So on frame 25, and I'm now going to move it to there. So you can see this line that's appeared now with these sort of dots on it. It may not be too visible in the compressed version, but there's these little dots, and these are actually showing you the keys in the frame. So that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, all the way up to 25. Now you can see we've moved it across and we've moved it away, and if you want to see what that looks like, that's the side view. So we haven't gone up and down in this keyframe at all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to frame 50. I'm going to put another keyframe in, and let's say I wanted to move precisely to the right. So there's these little handles here. The green one is the up and down handle. The blue one, which is quite hard to see there, is the forwards backwards handle, and the red one is the left to right handle. So I'm going to grab the left to right handle and drag right. So that tells me I'm trying to push the mouse forward and backward, but it isn't moving the object forward and backward. It's only moving left and right. So that now means that I know I haven't moved my forwards backwards position at all because I've used one of the handles. Likewise, if I'd selected just the blue or just the green, I would have only moved in that axis. And it just means that it allows you to be a bit more precise if you're doing mechanical type animations or things traveling in a linear direction, like on a track or something like that, like a push rod. So that's now at keyframe 50, and you notice that that straight line we had became a curve. As soon as we put that keyframe in and moved this object, that line changed. And in fact, if you watch it, as I move this keyframe, that line is moving. Now that is because by default Lightwave is adopting a sort of it's not Bezier curves, but it's a curved approach to animation. So it tries to basically take a nice smooth route between the keyframes. Now we can change that, and I'll show you that in the graph editor in a minute. But this is just a sort of an easy path that it can take, not too sharp on the corners, not too demanding on the motion. It's just an easy path basically. So we're going to carry on, and we're going to put in our remaining keyframes. You notice that line has sort of petered out. It's sort of like an onion skin in animation terms. It lets you see where you've been basically. So on this one I'm going to use the blue controller, and I'm going to pull it back to here. And you can see that, again, I'm moving the mouse left and right in this instance, and we're only seeing forward-backward motion from the object. So that's there. We're going to go to keyframe 100, put another one in, move it left. I'm going to move it to about the center, and I'm going to move it forwards. So I did a left only and then a forwards-backwards only motion on the controller. And then I'm going to go to keyframe 125, I'll put the final one in, and this one I'm going to change the height. Now actually, if I just Control Z that back to where it was, let me show you the side view. You see our path is completely flat all the way around this. Actually that's really hard to see, but there we go, that's a little bit better. So you can see how our object is moving around that path, but it isn't changing in the vertical in any way. So let's go back to our view. So on this last keyframe, keyframe 125, I'm going to move it vertically. Now have a look at what that's done to our curve. You see on the last, the beginning bit, oh, that's There we go. This bit is flat to the ground. And then in order for this to take that easy curve, that smooth curve motion, it has to drop down. It's sort of like swinging wide on a corner if you drive a car. So it's swinging down there in order to make that curve. So again, we'll cover how that animates in a second. So if we just zoom out, and now we can scrub through our timeline, and you can see how our object is moving as smoothly as it can between those points. If I go to a side view, so there it drops down and swings up to make the final keyframe. Now that's just, you know, 5 keyframes or so on a timeline. Now what say we wanted to change one of those keyframes? Well, we can just go through and find the keyframe we want. Let's say we don't like that position there. As long as we're on the keyframe, we can now, and I'm using the vertical controller, I'm dropping it down through the floor. So you can see that's now underground. And because we're on a keyframe, that's remembered the change. So that's now changed the way that curve works. And we've got a different motion than we had before. Now, if we're not on a keyframe, like say we're on frame 61 here, if I move it, you see the curve isn't changing and it hasn't created a keyframe. It's because this is on existing. So this is saying you're only allowed to change existing keyframes, which is why I get into the habit of creating it first on the frame I want, then moving it into position. If you move an object into position and then forget to keyframe it and move the timeline, it jumps back, as you'll see now. If I go back to there, it's jumped back and you've lost that position. So you may have spent a good few minutes trying to really put that right into place precisely and have lost it because you've got to press enter. So for me, I've just got into a habit of create the keyframe first, move it. You can always delete the keyframe, and that's actually a good point. Let's do that. Let's go here, and let's on frame 90, and we'll create a keyframe. So it's enter, and normally I just press enter, enter. But let me just explain what you're seeing here. So we're creating a keyframe for the things that are selected, which is the object. You may have many objects selected, and you're creating keyframes for all of them. It might be a bone, it could be a null object, it could be anything. But the idea is that it's the selected items. You can also say just the current item, whichever one is selected down here, and it could be current item and descendants. So if this was a bone chain, so let's say you're animating a hand and you'd like to create a bone for the wrist and all of the finger bones just by animating the wrist, you can do that by using current item and descendants. This also works for parented objects as far as I'm aware. So if you've got a car with 4 wheels and 2 doors and they're all parented back to the main car body, if you keyframe the car body and you have current items and descendants selected, that will go ahead and make keyframes for the wheels and the doors even though you weren't using them. And then down here it's saying what would you like to create a keyframe based on. So by default it's everything. So it's keyframing its position, it's keyframing its rotation, and its scale. Now you may have an instance where you want to maybe animate a ball bouncing, so you're going to animate its vertical and its forward motion, but you want to put keyframes on its size differently. So if you think of the motion of a bouncing ball, it accelerates down to the ground and then would squish slightly vertically, and then it would expand and go past circular size or spherical size, so it goes taller than it would normally be. But those keyframes would only be maybe 5 or 10 keyframes either side of the bounce point. So you'd be animating the vertical motion separately to the scale. So you wouldn't necessarily want to create keyframes for scale as well as position all the time. But this allows you to decide what you want and where. And generally what I find is I will create a keyframe for everything, and then when I'm in the graph editor, which we'll be going to in a bit, delete the things out that I didn't need. You can generally tell it's wrong because when you look at the motion it looks bad, so you can go in and decide what's wrong with it and get rid of that thing or fix that thing. So we're going to create that keyframe at 90 as we said, and again you'll watch the curve change slightly because now it's got to interpolate that new motion. And I'm going to go ahead and move the object here, and you can see how it's now. I don't know if you can see these dots again, but they're fairly closely spaced together. Here they're expanding out because it has to get from here to here, from frame 75 to 90, whereas before it was going from here to here over a full 25 frames all the way up to 100. So the frame spacing, you'll see this looks faster than that. It's moving slower here and faster here. So let's say we didn't want that keyframe there. We accidentally created one. We didn't mean to do it. So we hit delete, and it says delete the motion key, and again gives you those same options. So you can say delete the key for this and everything beneath it, just the selected things, just this item, and only delete the rotation perhaps, or only delete the scale. So I'm going to delete everything, and you'll see that dot disappears. Our object hasn't moved back yet until we change frames, but as soon as we do, you'll see it's back to how it was. So we've got a little bit of basic motion there. Nothing fancy by any stretch. But let's say we wanted to now say, well, we want to rotate the object as it goes around. Now, we're not talking about align to path or anything too fancy here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the keyframes, and for that I can use shift and left and right cursor. So I'm holding shift, cursor right, and that takes me to the next keyframe, cursor right, and cursor left goes back. So we're on the second keyframe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to rotation mode, so Y, and again you can see those arrows have changed to some wheels or rings, and there's one for pitch, there's one for heading, and one for bank. It's a little hard to see which one's which there, but it's the red one is for heading. So if I click on that, I can rotate it round. If you wanted a proper view there we go, we can line it up. So now I'm going to go to the next keyframe. You notice I didn't have to create a keyframe there. It was already created, and that existing option just updated those settings as we needed to. Now, think about what we're creating here. We're creating a sort of a loop, like a car going around a racetrack. So we could rotate this round this way to line up, and it looks right here, but it's going to have to, if we back those frames up, see how it's got to flip all the way around? So you have to think about how you're going to rotate something. So if I go back to that and undo, we went clockwise around this line, so we're going to go clockwise some more to come round to there, and back to here, and clockwise. I'm going to put that there, and we've got to clockwise all the way around, and then we might as well tip that up. So this asks it to sort of start to lean up, so that by the time it gets to this keyframe, it's pointing up, and as well as being aligned to that path around there. And then the last one is all the way up to there. There we go. I think that's right. Yeah, that's pretty much right. So let's go back to our top view, or near top view. And we can now see that our object is rotating around the path. Now, obviously we can see here it's already leaning in. So it's turned into that corner long before it ever gets there. And also we talked earlier about the way these paths are trying to be smooth. They're not trying to take too sharp a corner. So what we'll do is we'll have a look in the graph editor at them, and this should hopefully explain why they behave the way they do. So graph editor over here is Control F2. So there's a lot going on in here, so I'll just give you a brief overview of what's what. So we've got the object selected arrow when we open the graph editor. Now if we change to another object, it doesn't change this graph editor. If you have to close and open the graph editor, you can pull in information from these objects down here. So if you need to see the heading of the light versus the heading of the object, you can drag them both in and compare them. But it will always generally show you just the things that were selected when you open the graph editor. So this is our position, our X, Y, and Z, our heading, our pitch, and our bank. And if you don't know heading, pitch, and bank, heading is, think of that like yaw. So in an airplane, that's the rudder that makes it look left and right without tilting. Pitch is the nose going up or down in the air. and bank is the roll. So that's the leaning of the object left or right. And then the last three here, which we didn't change in our animation, but we can maybe do it towards the end, is the scale X, Y, and Z. So we can see all these lines are available to us in the graph editor, and we can rescale this if we wish. And then there's some magnification and positional controls up here to just get what you need to see more easily. So let's have a look at our graph. So we're selected on position X, so we can see our line, our X position, starts, goes up, flattens off, then increases, peters off, goes past that point and comes back to that level, which is 10 and a bit meters. Then it comes down, goes past this point, which is minus 2 meters, sort of goes past it, then comes back to there. So what we'll do is we'll start to smooth out this curve and make it a bit more appealing motion-wise. So if we right click and drag, we create a box that selects those points. We can do that over several things if we wanted. And what I'm going to do, that's lit up, you can see this information down here. So this is TCB spline. This is tension, continuity and bias. Essentially they work against each other and with each other, and if you play about with them, you'll get a feel for how one affects the other and how they all affect the line. But tension essentially is like ease in. If you increase it to 1, it has to ease out, I should say. If you've used to 2D animation software like After Effects or that sort of thing. So what this has done is this has made our X position start much more slowly. There's no change at the beginning and it curves into that there. Now that keyframe I like. I don't want to change that. If I do, I'll show you what happens if we set the tension to 1. So this is ease in, which is what I said before and meant ease out. So this starts off without any X motion, increases, then decelerates to nothing for when it gets to here. Now in this instance, I don't like that. So I'm going to go back. In fact, I'm going to 0 and tab to go on to the next box. So that creates a nice flowing curve for there. Now with this one, remember we kept the X position exactly the same. So I'm going to select both of those and I'm going to increase the tension to 1 for both of those. So now it starts off not moving. This is only the X position, remember. This is anything else isn't being affected. So it starts off with nothing, accelerates in, keeps accelerating, it's at a constant speed there, decelerates, doesn't move on the X-axis, re-accelerates. This is now coming right to left, so it's a negative change. It comes down to here, and then these two we're going to select. Again, I'm just right mouse button box selecting, and then I'm going to increase the tension to those. So we've changed that X position quite dramatically, but it's a much tidier curve now, and when we look at that in layout, we'll see a much more pronounced change. So I'm now going to switch over to the Y-axis. Now this is the vertical, remember, in Lightwave. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of them, and I'm just going to increase the tension to 1. So it starts off no vertical change, drops through the floor, comes back to ground level, stays at ground level, goes up to the roof, and decelerates as it gets to the top vertical point there. Then in the Z-axis, so this starts off at a constant speed. Now what we could do is we could select that, and if we set the tension to -1, it forces a more accelerated start. So it starts at a faster speed and decelerates into it. Now I don't think we're going to need that for this, so I'm going to set that to 0. As that line, if you see that little orange line, that helps you sort of get a guide. If that orange line is going up this blue line, that's generally a good sign. So I'm going to select those two, and I'm going to increase the tension there. And then this one, it does overshoot a little bit, so I'm going to select that and increase the tension, and I'm going to select those two and increase the tension. So that's the positions done, essentially. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the heading. So we could select, we could leave these as they are actually. In fact, let's do that. Let's have a look at how our animation looks now. So we've affected now the positional keyframes by changing the tension of some or all of them. So if we just scrub through this, you see now, don't worry about the rotation of the arrow, just the position of it. So it's now going straight up. It's not swerving out to take that corner. As it gets there, it curves in. So we've created a more linear motion here. This is a straight line, and a straight line, and a straight line, and a straight line, because we set those start and end points to 1 on the tension. And again, play about with them. There is no right answer. It's whether it looks right or not. That's all. So if you get what you want by playing with the BIOS controls or the continuity, as long as it looks right to you, as long as it's what you want, it's right. It's, you know, get the result you need. It doesn't matter about how you get it. So there's our simple animation. We'll go back into the graph editor, and we're going to select heading, pitch and bank. In this instance, we're going to select all 3. So we've got 3 controllable lines here, and I'm just going to select everything on the animation, and I'm going to select the tension to 1. So this means everything starts off static and rotates into the new position and slows as it gets there, stops, and then starts again into the new position. So a very simple change. There we go. If I just play that. Okay. So not going to win any Oscars, obviously, but hopefully that explains keyframing. Hopefully you've been able to see where the buttons are, how they operate, what some of the features do, and it'll make a lot of the other tutorials that are out there make a bit more sense if you're using this as just a little bit of groundwork for it. So hopefully that's helped, and there you go. Cheers, bye.